Hi there, I'm going to show you how you can create a Self Welt pocket. So the welt pocket is one which looks like this, where you've got a rather large wide lip along the opening, and then you've got your pocket all on the inside. And from the reverse it looks like this. So this is a technique that you can use on trousers, jackets, basically anything that you like, but it's probably more common on trousers or jackets. So this is a self-welt pocket because instead of having separate pieces for the welt and then for the pocket bag, the whole thing is constructed just from the garment piece and then one long section from which you form the pocket bag and the welt. If you're on one of my courses, you'll have been given one of these pattern pieces for the pocket, which you'll need to cut away from the paper so that you have your pattern piece like this. You'll need to cut one of the pocket piece in a fabric of your choice. I'd recommend using a medium weight cotton fabric just so that it's going to hold its shape and give you an easier job to make the sample. And then you'll also need to cut a piece of fabric which will represent the garment, and that's going to measure 25 centimetres in length by about 18 centimetres wide. And I'd recommend for this using quite a stable fabric, so something like calico or a heavier weight fabric. So I've cut my pocket piece from this fabric here, and then I've also transferred those stitching lines. So that's that way up. So to do that, I just used a pin and poked into the four corners with a pin, overlaid the pattern onto the fabric, onto the wrong side of the fabric, and then using this pen, which will come away with a little bit of water, I then transferred through the four marks and then used a ruler to draw in the rectangle. On the garment piece, what I've also done is I have marked the line where the pocket stitch lines are going to go in, and that line represents the bottom of the stitch lines. So the opening will sit like this onto the fabric, and on the reverse side of that I've applied a small piece of interfacing which is just slightly bigger than the stitch lines that I'm going to sew. So the piece of interfacing you'll be cutting is really only ever so slightly bigger than the rectangle that's marked onto your pattern. So once you've applied the interfacing and you've drawn this line on here, and this line is probably about a third of the way down or maybe a quarter of the way down depending on where you want to put it, just make sure you've got enough space above the line to complete the welt and below the line for the pocket bag to hang. So the next thing I'll do is I'm going to fold this in half and get a crease, open it back up again. So I've got a nice central point for that. I'm going to fold my pocket bag in half, so I've got a crease along that line there, and you'll see that when you fold that in half, one of your stitching lines will be exactly on that crease line. And I'm going to fold the pocket in half this way as well, so I've got the creases marked, so I can match up the crease that's down the centre of my garment piece, and I can match the lower stitch line there, the one that's the central crease should match to the line that I've drawn on my garment piece, and then I can just position that there, and then I'm going to pin this in place. And once that's pinned, I'm going to then stitch along those stitching lines, and I'm going to stitch from one of the long sides and then pivot at the corners. I need to make sure my stitching is really accurate at this point, because if my stitching's not accurate then my pocket won't be accurate later on. So when I stitch across the short edges, I'm going to count how many stitches along one side, and when I get to the other side make the same number of stitches in the other side, and that will help me to keep this perfectly rectangular. So this is the one that I've stitched. So I started on the longer edge and stitching around the marked pocket lines, and as you can see on the wrong side that's gone through the section that's interfaced, and I've got a nice rectangle on the back. So from the wrong side, what I'm going to do next is to cut through the fabric and form a Y shape in each of the corners. So I'm going to cut along the centre and then cut into the corners right up to, but not through, those corner stitches. So I'm going to cut along that line next. So this is the one that I've cut through the centre right up to the corners there. It really helps if you use a sharp pair of scissors and just use the very tips to get you right up to those stitches, because if you start cutting like this, you're going to start to go through them. So and as I said before, it's really important to make sure that you're being accurate. If you don't cut right up to the corners, you won't be able to get a really good rectangle opening on your pocket in the next stage. So once that's cut, turn it back to the right side. You're going to post those bits through the opening to the wrong side. And then what I want to do is to press those open so that there's no visible pocket fabric from the right side of the fabric. So what I find is really helpful is if you press open these seam allowances first. So I'm pressing that open from that side, flipping it over and pressing this one open from this side, making sure that's totally flat. And then if I start to form my rectangle opening at this stage, I can find I can get a much better rectangular shape there by doing the pressing in 2 stages. And then get those edges nicely pressed as well. And then if I just check from the right side, you can see a tiny bit of that fabric there, but not enough to need to worry about it. If you're finding that you're getting quite a lot of fabric wanting to poke through, then you probably haven't cut right into your corners enough on the previous stage. So go back, push the fabric back through, just check how far you've cut into the corners, and then trim a bit further if you're having trouble getting this rectangle. So I'm quite happy with that. Then the next stage from the wrong side is that you're going to form the welt, and the welt is formed by using this fabric here and creating a pleat. I'm going to fold the bottom edge of the pocket up and form a pleat by folding that into that opening. Like so. And I want to make sure that my pleat on each side is even and that this folded edge meets the top of this, and also that I've used the lower edge of the pocket and not the other edge. So making the pleat there, and then just turn it over and check, so I can sort of press with my fingers to form enough of a crease that when I turn it to the right side I can see how well that's going to sit in that gap, and I think that's pretty good. So once you're happy with the welt and that you've formed there, that it's an even width all the way along and that it touches or would touch the top of the opening there. So if you turn it back to the wrong side, and then I'm just going to press that so that I've got a permanent crease across there. Just check again from the right side, that is right. And then once you've pressed it with the iron, just put a couple of pins in there just to hold that pleat in place. Now, what a lot of the sewing books say to do is to whip stitch or hand stitch across this opening to keep the opening in the pocket closed until you finish constructing. But actually what I find is if you put your hand stitching into the wrong place, then it can mean that your fabric doesn't move in the way that you want it to at a later stage. So I'm going to just keep it pinned and pressed, and that's enough. So then my next stage, from the right side, I'm going to pull up from the bottom of the fabric, the bottom of the garment here, lift up this to reveal the pocket, just a single layer of the pocket on the inside, and then these seam allowances here. And what I need to do next is to stitch exactly on that same stitch line all the way across there. So I'm going to pin that in place so that that isn't going to move when I stitch that. And the reason I'm doing this next bit is so that the welt will be fixed. It will be a fixed pleat by you stitching through there. So it's going through the seam allowances and through the pocket. It isn't going through the garment, and it isn't going through the other piece of the pocket this side. So just a single layer of fabric. So this is the one that I've sewn, and I've stitched it in pink across here, so you can see exactly where I've sewn. So sewing through the seam allowances, through the pocket bag, and then if you turn it over, you can see that stitch line through there. Then turning it back round, you can see that that pleat is now fixed. It won't come undone because you've fixed it permanently with those stitches. From the wrong side, you're nearly finished with the pocket. You're going to bring that down, and if you've done this right, those bottom edges should meet, the side edges should meet. And then from the right side, sometimes you might find that that's sort of pulling open here, so you can pull on the bottom edge of the fabric, pull on the underneath side to kind of close the pocket up a little bit if it's gaping at this stage. And what you'll do is to put in some pins, keep these edges together, and then you're going to just pull that back. So I'm going to take the pins out that are holding the pleats because that's now fixed. Pull that back so you reveal this triangle, and you're going to stitch over the stitch line that's already there, stitching probably about 1.5 centimetres in, down here, and then across the bottom of the pocket, and then pulling that back, and then up this side again, stitching over the stitch lines that are already there, and that will form your pocket. And once you've sewn that, then you can edge finish with pinking shears, with overlocking or zigzag, so that it won't fray. So this section, this part is done looking at it from the right side and just pulling the garment back so you reveal those little triangles, stitching around the pocket back over that triangle. So this is what it looks like once it's finished. So you can see I've stitched across the triangle, around the pocket, and back up through the other triangle, and I've just used the pinking shears to just edge finish the pocket edge and also edge finish my garment piece. And then from the wrong side, you can see that's the pocket bag finished. This is where I've just pinked across the seam allowances. And then from the right side, you should have that nice, neat, evenly shaped welt. And there you go. Welt pocket done.